Alright, hello guys and welcome to another session. So we're going to be continuing today from our last video where we got to see rule-based access control and policy-based access control, and we're implementing access control level, and we're building a full or at least a mini version, full-scale security measure for authorization authentication. Right? We have different access control models such as role-based, policy-based, and attribute-based. And we did a lot of things. We saw how we created the system policies. We also saw how we implemented using authorization aspect to be able to intercept the, the request flow, right? The flow chain in the request path, and conduct authorization before continuing the processing. And we did some other update of code, and today we are simply going to continue with trying to complete our authentication system, our auth system, which include authentication authorization. So thus far, we created the policies, right, and we implemented it in the user service where we got to use an annotation require policy, which we saw, and we passed the two kind of policies that we required, and this is going to be intercepted, and we're going to use aspect oriented programming in Java to authorize the request. So today we're going to continue. For those of you who are new here, my name is Ngane Emmanuel. I'm a software engineer, and I'm taking you for this course. And you're welcome to my channel. And you're watching a session of which is part of the service building, secure, scalable, fault tolerant, and low latency application using Java and Spring Boot. Java Spring Boot, right? So what we're going to do today is going to try to complete this check, because like I said, we're using policies, and what we're going to look at today is see an additional aspect, that is business rules. Okay, now the question that most of you, or at least most people, fail to ask is, how do businesses meet how do businesses comply with say state policies, or maybe make quick changes to their system without having to recompile their system? Also, or how do a business like Amazon or Facebook or any other large business out there, or medium-sized business, can guarantee that the thousands of users use their system, the thousands of employees or users or millions of employees or users use their system the way they want, right? Because it isn't really just enough to say I have an admin role, that means I can perform certain actions. What if, say, you have a quarrel with your admin and your admin is angry? Somebody who has an admin role is angry at your business. Can that person just go to your database and say, okay, I want to delete the entire user, right? Or what if you are currently showing content to a particular region in a country, and the government says, all right, due to these reasons, we demand that this kind of content should not reach our country, right? How do you make sure that the read requests that are being made by clients from that region read only posts that don't have those kind of content in it? You have filters, but these are just things that you have to think about. There are more advanced ways that you go about it, but I just want to like trigger your idea of like business rules, to trigger your mind to think in terms of business rules. How are business rules, which are ever evolving and changing, being implemented, and how do a company implement this on the fly without having to hard code it into their system, then redeploy their system? I mean, if you have to do that, then maybe every day or every 1 or 2 days, you're constantly redeploying your system just to meet up with policies and new business changes. And this is what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at how business rules are being managed in large-scale businesses and how you can go about implementing it in such a way that it doesn't just act as an extra layer. It really governs how people use your system. For example, someone with an admin privilege and is admin system policy, right, cannot delete 1,000 users, right? You can write a business rule to restrict, even though I have an admin delete, but restrict that I can only delete this particular kind of user, maybe a user that is directly under my supervision, or a user that some other combination of different higher level managers have approved to be deleted. And these kind of business rules have to be implemented in a way that you can make changes to them without affecting the system and without changing the system itself and redeploying the system. Essentially making sure that the system behaves differently while it is running. Okay, and I hope that I really am able to explain that well, but I think as we go and try to implement it, we are going to understand. So thus far, I think we ended here, and I did not throw the exception here, so we can throw the forbidden exception again. Authorization required, right? So what we did here the last time is that we simply checked the policies and we got the authentication user from the author user, right, from the context, and we basically checked the hash policies, which we saw the implementation of it the last time. We explained how that works, okay? And then if it doesn't have, so in this case we have to put like a not, because it does not have. We are checking if it's either not or does not have that policy, or does not have any of this policy, right? We want to fail, right? So yeah, so if it doesn't have any of the required policies, we have to fail all of them. So if it is one that is passed here, it's still going to be the same thing. So we saw that last time, and so basically we have done is we've checked for policies. Now we need to check for business rules that govern what happens even if I have the policies, right? And this is why we are this is what we are trying to implement. And what we are going to implement, we're going to have a couple of things. Essentially, the algorithm goes like this. We have to load business rules from the DB, right, which are basically stored in the DB so that they can easily be changed, and the DB acts as a single source of truth, right? And then we build the authorization context, which is basically the context which we are going to use to check the rules against, right? And then we check business rules, right? And we have to do this in such a way that it is extendable, and it follows industry standard design patterns, right? And so I have this, again, we will be using this PDF and a sample table of how our DB will look like. It's something like this, right? These are our actions, which are our system policies, right? And you see, we already developed this. And this attribute source here basically is it's like a context, right? That says, what are we doing, right? What do we want to do? Like the context of what we want to do. We are deleting, right? But this policy, what does this govern? Okay. And in essence, this is like so we can have multiple different variables here. We can have like a subject. We can have like a delete that says, okay, I want to delete a user, but only if the subject, in this case, in our case, would be a user, is from the department admin, right? And so we have like a generic table here that allows us, this can be extended, but a generic table here that allows us to replicate that kind of behavior, course, we also have like environment. Well, we have this resource, right? So you can also check based on a resource. So you have to delete a resource, but is that resource the same as from the resource of that's, are you in the current region, or basically the same region where that resource is found? Okay, so maybe the user itself has like a region field or attribute in its class, and we can check that against it. And then we have environment. Essentially, environments are anything that, they are neither subject nor are they resource, right? They are not concrete classes that you can check on. They are ever evolving, but they are things that are required to enforce security and constraints against actions being performed in your system. For example, time, right? We can also have based on IP address. So you can say, okay, I need you to, I need that if you are able, if to be able to delete a user, you should be able to do it from a secure device, an approved device, from a given time, within a given time frame. Okay, and you can have variable kind of rules here, and we just kept it as simple just to give you the idea, but this is most like the basics. I think you're going to research, you're going to find that you have like the subject, the resource, and then the environment. And we are going to create, I had this thing I've created here just to give you some understanding. And so what we are going to do is we're going to create a class which is the authorization context, and it's going to have the subject, which in this case is the actor, right? And it's going to have the resource, right, with a target resource, and then the environment. Okay, and it's everything that's not, again, it's not the user, not the resource. And then we're going to have the action, which in our case is already the system policies. Okay, and now I go further to explain to you like environments. I see environment can be a lot of things. It can be time in hours, it can be the IP address, it can be a country, it can be if it can be like a boolean, a check, if of course the particular user has multi-factor authentication verification, MFA, multi-factor authentication verified, right? If it's already done, if it's from a trusted device and from a particular kind of network, and you can run a host of checks based on the kind of action, and you can have these restrictions to make sure and further protect your system against hackers. So you can have like an admin, and you can say, okay, an admin can only perform a delete action or modification in your database or your system, or even access to certain functions if and only if they are using it from a secure network, maybe within your network, or from only within your network. Okay, so if someone from a remote place, from a remote network or outside your network want to access or perform that, this, even though the person may have an admin system policy and maybe pass all of these other checks, this gets to block because this does not pass. And so in a system where it's a fail fast, the first fail, and this immediately this fails, the entire operation fails. And this is how big tech companies, have extra layer of protection against actions, despite people having authorizations, system authorizations to perform those actions. But do they have all the necessary do they meet the necessary business rules and constraints to allow them to perform that action, right? Because I can say, okay, I have an admin policy or whatever kind of policy, but hey, I am not within your network, right? So what happens is that I fail, right? Maybe I am not within a particular device, an office device. And again, this is if those of you who are working and you have heard people working and you're seeing, sometimes you join a company and they give you your own devices, right? All of those devices, again, when you say like a trusted device, you cannot perform an action. Maybe you cannot push to a certain server, you cannot perform certain action on a certain server from within a non-trusted device. The device that those companies give you when you join the company, they have already been registered. They have already their IP, their MAC addresses, and different verification IDs are already stored in their database and have already been given certain privileges. So if you use another device, you realize that you're unable to access the same system that you're able to access with the trusted device. And this allows not just for monitoring from the system, but also for auditing, saying that, okay, you perform this action from this particular device because the device is associated with your ID and your name and your personal information. And so if something goes wrong, the company, even if something finally goes wrong despite all this protection, the company can get back and say, okay, let's audit this, let's go through our logs and let's see who did what. And at the end of the day, they find the person exactly that did whatever it is they did, right? And there is a whole lot of checks and data that is being kept, and this is how they are being implemented. So we are going to create, in this case, since these they can be a lot, we are going to use we're not going to use a static class. We are going to use like a map, right? That's going to, I think, the generic class, right? That's going to allow us to save more of this, and even the ones that we have not yet thought about. Okay, and we are also going to create like an environment builder. Again, this is just like a builder that shows us how the environment is being built, so that when we do get right, we know that, okay, we have already put the object in it. And then we're just going to build like a business entity, right? So business rule entity and stuff like that. And again, it's just a representation of the table that we saw earlier. It is, right? And so let's get into it. So the first thing I want to do is like, let's build the entity itself. Anyway, since we're working with one class for now, we are going to just build it in the user class, and this is going to be the model, right? And we're going to do business rule. No, it's not a business rule, right? And yeah, just to save time, right, I'm just going to copy all of these, okay? Just make sure that we are going as quickly as possible. Right, we have not yet created attribute source, but we'll create it as source. Yeah. And that's an enum. So what will happen is we're going to do the entity. So entity is going to be saved in the database, and it's complaining because there's no ID. But we're just going to go ahead and put all our other annotations. So we're going to have the as constructor, and the add all acts constructor. Also going to have the add data, and then maybe the add builder. I always like to use a builder because it's just fun using that way. And then we're going to have the ID, right, and generated value, strategy, and we're going to have generated type, identity, right? So then we are going to build this one. So that's 3. So put it 2, attribute source, right? And this will be an enum, and this is going to contain 3 things. And this is what we're going to. So it's going to be subject. Then resource, so action, subject resource action, but it's not even action. I think this will be environment. Yeah. Yes. And you can also like put like a comment on it, right? If you, I don't know if that will go. this one is the actor, I think. Anything not source or subject, e.g. so we have like time, IP, country, device, network. So yeah, that way. And so business policies, we're just going to import that class. There we go. So we also have like comment there, and these are system rules. So the action system policy, yeah, going to be action, right? But like I said, they're the same. Okay, so we do have those, right? And the next thing we want to create is, we have two things. So we created our attributes. So in our so we have to create our authentication, authorization context, and that will be, I think in context, where is it? Yeah, so kind of, ooh. So we can actually just have like another security here. Again, it's a monolith, so but each service is performing its own authorization context. So I mean, want to leave that there, so I can have like security dot authorization. Oh, sorry, context. I should have even just created it. Anyway, security dot context, and we want to have a class which is authorization context. Okay, and what this will have is going to have those three things that we defined, but it's just going to be a private field, and I already put them somewhere here. So I'm just going to copy that, just because makes things easier. And that's class. And in this subject, it's going to be, for us, it's going to be like a user, it's going to be our subject, and the resource is going to be not class, no Spring Framework. Okay, so, okay. So for us here, alright, so it's a bit interesting here because I don't have any resource class. Okay. Do I? What I would, like I have like a tier. And well, we need to build the environment, as for sure. We've not yet created this one. An action is system policy. But it can also be like multiple system policy. But I don't think we are going to need the action here. Like for our own authorization context, I've already checked the action, check for possibly environment though. So the resource, so when we build an authorization context, at least my idea is here, when we're building it, we're going to pass the resource that we are, the target, right, is the target. And then we're going to load that. Then the environment itself, we need to create the environment. Okay, so let's check that out. For environment, so it's only like context. It's still all part of the context. So it will be like environment. Well, let's see. Authorization context environment. Yes. And so we are going to use that is rather, so we're going to have authorization context environment. Instead, it's like environment there. And again, here is going to be it's just going to be like a hash map, which is going to be like private map of, so it's going to be a string, it's going to be our key, and then it's going to have like an object, we don't yet know, sorry, object. So we need to make sure that string is well defined. So import the map class, so private map, so that's like context, environment, yes, and kind of like public class, but we want to have Spring manage this one too. No, it's not entity component, and we want to do, no, we don't want to do, no, we don't want to do, but this is going to, so all as constructor, yes, we don't want to have any more as constructor. Each time we initialize this, we need to construct it. Then we'll have to add a public get, public method. Like public, the constructor sets the hold on. I'm just going to do the constructor myself. Public void kind of makes sense. Use the environment output. No, that's not actually what I want to do. me see. Ah, anyway, so I'll just initialize it here, of course, to new hash map. Yeah, so that's all it. Yes, and then I'm going to create a public get and setter. So yeah, which is going to return environment. But then the setter, I don't want to even put environment env, just like env, get environment. Get env is like, no, let's just keep it all. Should not allow them to put the shorthand. And we set the env. And in this case, it's not no, we don't want to put the set, we want to put the put, right? So that we can have, yeah, we can have the environment, right? And here it's not going to take an environment, it's going to take two things. We're going to take a string, which is a string and an object, which is a key. We're going to have environment dot put key value, right? So we can call this, we can call the environment variable, and then we put objects inside, okay? And we can get the entire environment itself, but also we can so we can get this environment. Let me see what I'm trying to do here. So I think this one allows us to put values inside. And we can have like public get, right? So just like we can get with like a string of ID. I don't know if that's even necessary. And is it like key? So it's key here, put key there, so that we can have environment. So can return. No, it's not a long also. We are returning an object. So we can return environment.getKey. Okay. I think if we need anything, so I think we will able, so in order to load the authorization context, we need to get the entire environment, which I don't know. Let me see, authorization context, you have authorization environment. Yeah, actually this is like a constructor. And for multiple requests, each of them will need to have their own separate environment, so we don't want to make it a singleton tool. Right, so we just have the component here so that Spring manages it. And the constructor, there's no constructor here. Okay, we don't get the environment because this returns a map and a map object. Right, we just call the environment itself. So like public void or public authorization environment, right? And yeah, so it's like a constructor level kind of stuff, right? And so this was like environment.new hash map. There we go. Well, it kind of changes. It can change. Yeah. So that this can be initialized via Spring because it has a constructor, which is an no arguments constructor, and basically that's what we want to do. And then we have the put method and then the get method using the key, right? You can also, like document it, right? What was it? Get environment specific. You can also do the same thing here. All right, just again, not really the best with. I think keep. But that's what I just did now. Again, unique. Not anything crazy. Basically, we are just using. These are all reusable stuff. These are all already, again, you look at the get is coming from the hash map. You are just repeating the same thing, but on our own class. I put it that way. And now we have our authorization context. We also have our context environment. And what's the next thing? We also have our business rule. Okay, we are going to create, say, so if we go to our aspect, so we're going to load the business rule from the TB using the loader, right? So we need a repository for the business rule. So we have the business repository. This is going to be an interface extending JP repository. So I have business repository, right? And that is going to extend JP repository, and it's not system rule, it's just going to be business rule, and yeah, the ID is long there. And what we are looking for is to return a list, right, of let me see, a list of business rule Java, find by action exactly and enabled. Here we go. So we want to find by action all business rule, find all by action and enabled, right? So all action and enable. So we're going to have string action, and this is going to be boolean enabled. Okay. I'm not even sure that this string is like a system. So system policy. It's going to be system policy, which is going to be action. This is an enum. Not sure. I don't know if it's going to work like this. Because if we, I don't know, because if we have to send it, and this is a string, we have to convert the enum to the string version, which is kind of okay. But anyway, let's see. Hopefully this does it conversion properly. If not, then we'll just do it the other way around. And then we are going to have our loader. We're going to have our business rule loader. Okay. And this is just going to have a method called private. No. Is it private? Sorry. Public load rules. Right. So I'm missing the return type. Public list of. What am I doing? List of business rule, and we're going to have total. Let's import the class list there, and we're going to have string, or we're going to have system policy based on file, and we're going to have enabled boolean. Yeah. Right, and this is also going to be like a service class. Is a loader service, and we're going to have a private variable where we're going to import or inject private business rule repository, and let's make this final so that we can use constructor injection. We're going to have require all as constructor. So I think this is load rules, and this is just going to be return business rule dot find all by action enable business rule enable. There we go. There we go. Okay, now we have our loader, we have our repository class. Okay, we now have our loader, yeah, with the constructor. Again, you could basically, anyway, it's self-explanatory. You get the point, right? So you pass in the system policy rules and the enable type. So what you want to do, so load rules, But we don't want to, because remember we are passing in our user, we are passing in multiple, no, that's not, that's roll order. That's roll order. Now user service, we're passing in more than one, right? At any given point, we're not just passing just one, right? A function can require more than one policy, okay? But maybe not enough for it to be on its own separate role, okay? And sometimes you can like have a role here, but you know, not enough to be on its own separate role. So it requires like a string, a couple of policies, right? That will require this. Again, it all depends on how you're designing your site, and this is just for demo purposes, not too complicated. And because we are doing this, we cannot check for, we cannot load business policies directly here. Because if we get the policy, right, we have the policies dot value, okay, and this is a list. Right, this is an array of policies, right? Policies. This value here is basically an array of policies. You understand? And what this takes is what we've passed. So let me bring that here. So what this takes is an array like this, right? Or it could be one, but again, it could also be many. Okay, and because of that, we cannot just load the business rule from the DB, because you'll be able, as you can see our definition of the business rule, you're only loading one. Okay, you're only loading one, or you could load all of them. Right? Load business rules from a list of rules. You could do that. Okay. Now let's check that out. All right. So if you want to load like this, because each time if we are going to go, we should just go to the database one time and then we load those rules, or at least compute that function one time. Yeah. I think we're going to need because you see my SQL has the ability to load, to find by multiple values, right? So it's basically where action is equal to user delayed, or action is equal to something like that, or so you have those operators or those commands, those comparators, some those, what are they calling them? I've forgotten. But let me show you what I'm trying to talk about. So where is it? Business rule. Where is that interface? Alright, so repository. So right now, if we are supposed to do this, we'll go to the loader and do some kind of a loop, and each time is going to load each individual. That's a lot of that's, like I said, that's a lot. Or we could require join, because let's see something, propagation. I know I want to do, if I go like basic SQL, Then you need to build the SQL query itself. Right, and that will be within the loader. Well, this is even in the service. It's supposed to be in the service. So let's go to the service. It's nice to go over there. So if you have to do something like public disclose system policies, so you take like a list of them or a set of them, right, since they are going to be unique. Okay, we need to first of all build the SQL query, right, and then run the query with business. So in order to build a query, right, we need to look through all of these. So it will be, I think it's a for policies equals to policies, and I'm going to have a string, maybe like a string builder. This will be select all from business rule. Yeah, where action so what I'll do is I'll do query. What I'll do, intervention string, right? So where query and so we have a policy. No, then we're going to have like parameter binding here. It's not going to be. But we're not trusting user parameters here. Okay. We have a set of queries that we use, which is basically policies, right? And I think it's going to be something, I don't know if it's definitely, if this actually works. I'm not sure this will work. Yeah. We could just go with a single, it's not going to be, it's just going to be a string, right? Yeah, it's going to be a string. And we're just going to have query plus equal to where action is equal to, does this work? There is, I don't know if there's like also we don't have that there. Like an or. Yeah, I think I'll get like a better way of doing this thing. Sorry, that doesn't. Because, and then the idea is that we build a query, right? Select all from business rule, right? Because again, it's business rule where you could also specify the table name. So you can go to the model area just to make sure that we have consistent table name. Normally it will do it like that, but you can also do a table and then have like a name and you have that. Okay, that's the default, so it's not needed. Right. This will be like the default of the business rule. So again, let's just keep it there for consistency's sake. Where is it? I think the context business rule aspect repository business rule loader. And so this builds our business rule based on the number of policies. So it's going to go select all from business rule where so it's going to action is equal to that, right? Or action is equal to that. Right? So it's going to select all of them. And then we are going to call the repository, which is a business rule repository, dot run query. Okay, well, just like pass like a string, like a SQL query, like a string of query. Okay. And like I said, I'm just going to try to implement this. No. What am I doing? The repository. Oh, let me just, what am I doing? I'll just put load rules. multiple rules. And if we go to the repository, we have the list of business rules, defined by multiple rules, with the word attribute, blah blah blah. String 2. So I want to just give a string, going to be query. And then somewhere up here, we are going to execute query. I think it's like native query. Alright, query there. No. Oh, no, is it? How do I? Oh, no, don't make method void. Then I want to. I've forgotten how to do this thing. How can we find this? I'll just ask GPT. So anyway, it's. Let me ask for help, guys. I could go to Google, but at this point, I just want to go straight to GPT. So I'll just say I have this. I have. And then I want to do. Okay. I see. Oh, it's I've not used this for a while. Param policies. Yeah, there we go. Ah, all right. So I see what's happened. I'm just going to copy this. Anyway, I'm learning that too. This is good. And I was also worried about safe parameter binding, and this really just helped. So if let me understand this. So yeah, this is the part I was missing. I was trying to get the policies here, like Fortuna they use param. So you pass it to the param and the list of system policy, and they have select B from business rule B, where B dot action. Of course you are. In policy. Okay. Also, it's a set of policy. Yeah. All right. So the rule now becomes something else. There we go. So same thing again. Same thing. We load rules. So we can load all the rules from one policy, right? And of course, we're going to have like the. Oh, so we have also for set boolean enabled, and we have enabled. And I'm also thinking that repository is going to have add param. Let me just double check that, just to make sure. So that's good. Valid. Alright, so you can use the transactional to make sure that the entire method executes perfectly, no errors. see something. I wanted to. Just I want to see something. It's not here. Oh, it is. Interesting. Huh. Oh, it is actually. Let me see. You understand? How to something that I kind of done long time ago. I'm reading. If this does not work, then it falls back in the first state. But I'm just reading. I'm just going to leave that out there. And what's this going to do? So it gets the input, and then yeah. So what I can do, what we can do now, is that now we have the list of business rule. We can actually load it directly, right? We can have the public final, so private final, business rule loader, okay. And we can load the business rule. We can have business rule loader dot load rules, which takes a list, okay. And what we can do is this takes a set of rules. Like set off, set copy of, or set off, and then I have fire policy of value. Will that work? Then enable is true. Okay, yeah, it does work. Okay. So here we are simply just loading the business rules, and we're going to load it to a list of business rules. You can just have like a variable business rule. And you see that this is going to return list of business rules. Again, you could just, if you are not familiar with those, you can just do the business rule thing like that. See the same thing. Just with the new Java, recent Java updates, you can use variables, the keyword var to, and Java is going to infer the type. So we now have the business rule, right? And we should now load our authorization context. We should build our authorization context using our context builder. However, we don't have an authorization context builder, right? And so these are our loaders, and we can have our builders too, right? Builders or builder, right? And we can have authorization context builder, and this just we're going to name it as service. It's a service, and this will have a method. I think. Yeah, this will have a method. We say public, and then it's going to return an authorization context, and it's going to be built. And authorization context is going to take in something, and let me see. Yeah, so because I did the authorization context in this, and I have this let me just type here. Do we need this here? Yeah, we definitely need it there. No. Yeah, I'm kind of calculating how to go about this. Okay, so you have attribute source. What am I? So authorization context builder is going to return authorization context, which is a single object, and each authorization context is going to have a series of yeah, that's interesting. Because the builder, if we use the builder itself, we call it class here, we need to specify a single class. You can only use it for one resource. The reason why I used the generic was that I wanted to be able to change the resource based on the implementation. Right, so when I'm building this, I wanted to be able to build it and change the resource. Let me see. No, that's not. I'm going to go. Alright, so let's go back to context, because this resource it can be any kind of resource. It could be, maybe if you have like a file system, it could be like a file. It could be any other kind of resource, right? That's like an entity or a class within our system, or an entity right within our system. So at least this is how I want to think about it. How do I, and why I wanted to use a generic, is that I thought I would be creating at the time, creating a single authorization context each time. But what I want to do instead, which is what's causing the confusion, is that I have an authorization context builder, right? And for each, if you go to the aspect for we've loaded this, and when we do the rule engine, right, the business rule engine, for each rule for each rule, we are going to have an authorization context. We're going to pass it. Okay. So authorization context builder is going to build you a list of authorization contexts context is, well, hopefully it's context is. And let me see, if it builds you a list of all contexts, and then for each rule, it's going to pass in the policy, this authorization context, right? And the policy. That's a bit complicated. I wish I had like a phone camera so I see me think. Because our context has, maybe I'm not using this in a proper way. We have the actor, the subject. This is loaded directly. It's loaded from the auth context, the authentication context. The environment is loaded from the policy. Well, no, the environment can be created. The environment is created doing authorization. So it could be a bunch of things. So context environment. You could simply just create a few of them, just for the builder. And use the HTTP value request to get most of those. Then the resource, we cannot build the resource itself. I don't know if it's, let me see. There's a way to build the generics. You could also let all of them inherit the base class, but generics are much better here. That allows you where you create a class, stuff like that. I want to see some suggestions here. Well, what I don't want to do is, what I want to do is to be able to pass in any class here, right? To be able to pass in any class here. What does this? So I'll keep it like this, okay? And the authorization context, so builder, is going to take in the resource type, so it's going to take in source, right? And based on the source, It's going to return a builder. Right. Because I want to take the source from the policies, right? And we're looping through the policies and we're building authorization context. But no, it's going to be a single authorization context, but we're now just changing because two things will be different. So the source target is going to be the target resource. So if it is resource, right? If it is resource, and our flag here, because if you see here, we under our table, we have a flag, attribute source, which is resource, and then we have the field of the resource. And how do we get the resource here? All right. For this, I don't know if there's a general way, but for this, what I can do is what is the user service? You can extend this required policy and you can also add a target resource, right? You can add like a target here. So let me try to put this is like a class. Right. And this will be like a target object or class, right? And what we can do is that for this we can have the target, so we can have other policy here, value. So instead of value, have policies. Right, so here we can have policies equal to, and then we can have value target. Okay, and the target will be not required in the class. It's going to be the user, in this case, within a class, right? And what this gives us is this is a kind. So we're trying to perform an action on this target class, right? This is the target resource. Right. So you can keep it a target, or you can leave it as resource, and that will work. And this will allow us value dot. So this is not value policy dot policies. Here this is policies. And in the builder, now, we can take in so authorization context builder, right? We can now take in should not do that. So we have the class. So the resource type is a class. We could use the right. So policy authorization and set context. It's going to take in. So let's say it's going to take in the class, which is a target object, the resource, right? And this is going to and what we want to do is return. I think if we did authorization, we should just have private authorization context, authorization context. We want to make it final. We should just should make it RBAC constructor, and that's going to eliminate the need for that. Could not auto authorization context. I don't think we're so we need to put it at component just so that we want to go to there. Let's go. And we're going to return authorization context dot set. Right, so in the authorization context, however, we don't have getters and setters, so we are going to have a data and then at no axe constructor. Sorry. So we don't want to initialize it with a constructor, with the parameterized constructor. I think even just doing the components here really just comes with the no axe constructor, so maybe that's even redundant by itself. But I'm going to keep it there. So we're going to do, I think, dot set subject, and we're going to get a couple of things, which is we're going to get the context. So we're going to have a variable auth user auth context dot get. I think this gets auth user, auth result dot get auth, and this gets auth user. And this is starting method that we created. This authentication, or like I said, we put like a meta name here. But in typically, you could extend this to include all of this here, like all of the builder. But then we're going to have authorization context dot set subject to be that's going to be like a user. So for now, right, our auth user context only contains ID. If you go to the class, it only contains the auth user, sorry, the ID of the username and the role, right? And what you should do here, we're going to grab the user directly from the database, but you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to use like a cache, or at least try the cache first. On cache miss, then you grab it from the database, right? But right now we are not going to use cache. We are going to all as constructor private authorize context by the I know a repository I will need. I'm going to just do the public. Now with the constructor, authorization context. No, I don't want to make it final. It is editable. It's changeable. Then I could do, I think, auto-wire. And then I do user repository. OLM. Again, we need to change that repository name. There we go. So this way we can, of course, using the auth user, we can get so variable user is equal to we should just basically do a find by ID. So user repository dot find by ID, and this is going to be dot get ID, right? And there we go. And this is going to return to you a user object, and this is subject. Our subject here is a user object, so we're going to return an auth user. So it's subject user object. Oh, dot get. What's happening? Forward. We don't return that. Oh, so yes, okay, I know what to do. We're going to return authorization context there. But just before, again, that's all. And what's happening is that we are getting the ID from the authorization context, which we set at the filter level. If you are not yet familiar with that, you should go back and watch the videos. And then we now get we now try to set the authorization context, the subject of authorization context, which is the current user. Like I told you, in this case, it's going to be the current user, the actor. And then we also are going to try to set the resource, which is not the resource, because this is a class. This comes as a This is going to come. Yes, so it's the same thing, right? But let me show you what happens is that means our passing something like user dot sorry, user dot class. Okay, and so we need to create an object of that class at some point to be able to use it. Okay, but for now, I think that will do. And then we also want to you know what, we don't even actually want to pass the resource here. Right, because when we build the authorization context the first time, we are not going to get the resource. Right? We're just passing it. It is when we get the resource based on other variables, other factors, based on the policies. So the policies are going to define the resource, right? I don't know how to put this. Yeah. So it's going to be based on the policies. Because some policies are not going to use resource, right? If you look at our, right, so it's like, for example, this business rule, yeah, policy rule, is taking resource, right? And this can be like a user has to be from the same region or something. But then this other one is, this particular policy rule is based, the check is based on the user itself, the subject itself, right? But again, that's is known at run, it's already known. And then we have environment. Again, these environments are already being set, right? Variables that are already being set. That should be set actually, although we're not doing it at the lowest level that we're supposed to be doing. Actually, we are supposed to use interceptors just when the information comes to set a host of these variables, right? For example, the hours between, the hour, the IP address, the device that the person is using, right? And from the IP address, you can generate the location and other things, okay? And these are already known. However, the resource at this time is not already known, right? And it will be known when it is provided. You understand? Yes. So, okay. Anyway, that's still valid. But I also just realized that we made a very critical change which allows us to do what we just did. So I'm going to do that. And the change I'm talking about, sorry about the confusion. The change I'm talking about is the require policy. We added the class there. Okay. So, which means that when you call the require policy, right, you are calling with the target resource that you're trying to, verify, right? So I need an admin policy. I also need admin policy concerning the resource, right? What resource is this particular function trying to verify? And at least this is a simpler way of going about it. It's not perfect, but this will work for now to demonstrate the concept. So where's the builder? Yeah, Java. So we set our resource immediately, okay? Okay. So we set our resource, and we also have to set the environment, right? Now the environment, we need to create an environment generator, right? Now, like I said, technically within the interceptor, we are supposed to have be able to generate the environment. Okay. So somewhere around interceptor level, before it even gets to your security interceptors, right? Somewhere here, so we have auth interceptor. We are supposed to create, because here we are getting a HTTP servlet, right? And we can do the environment, right here. We can create the environment and keep it in environment context, okay? And authorization context environment. So we can do that and keep it in the environment context or in the auth context. Basically, we could extend the auth context itself, and then keep it. So in the interceptor, like I said, we are getting the pre-handled. We are checking for authenticators, right? And this is what basically we have different authenticators, right? We can have environment setters and set authorization context environment. And this is also where you should probably build your environment, your authorization context. And rather than doing what we have been doing here, you just extract it and then you set the resource. So you can use the same authorization context, and what just change is the resource. Okay. And so the process is running through multiple functions, and each function needs a different resource. Again, what you're changing there is basically the authorization context builder. You can simply just change the resource each time as you're passing it, like we are doing there. But you, rather than building it all in the context builder, you could take this actually and put it somewhere, and then you have like changing the resource within it. Then when you have all of this, because you'll be able to also build like the environment, like I said, the environment is mostly about hours, but I don't want to touch all of this. Okay, so what we would do is we can have like an environment builder, or because essentially it's the same thing. We're just going to get the HTTP servlet request, and we're going to get the request, right? So it's going to get all the information concerning the request, and we're going to like set the hours and stuff like that. I kind of highlighted it here somewhere. Right, yeah, so environment builder, right? So we are basically getting the HTTP servlet request, and then we're building it. And so we're getting the hours, we're getting the IP address, and then we're getting the device, right? And also like have this other thing. So this security context does it, right? And you can also include this in your security context. Okay, so you have different type of context in your authorization context if of course the user is multi-factor authentication verified. And if you want to check for this, so we are not checking for that for now. And what we can do is, we can just copy this, right? And not to just again, this is a builder, so we can put on the builder service. It's a service, right? So it renders some services. You can put it as a component, but I always like to use like it's a service. It renders a service, and then you kind of take the so it is authentication, authorization. Context, environment, rather than the other way around. So we're going to import class. We're going to import servlet, and then we're going to put yes, and then we're going to like add all of these, right? And we're just going to return the env, and that's it for this. So again, just to iterate, we are getting a request that we are on, and we're creating a new authorization context environment, right? And since it's a map, we're just putting in the information in our maps, right? And so it's env.put, you get the string, and then the information, the value here. There's a key and there's a value, just like we define in our put. So we have a key unique identifier object you wish to put in the hash map, just like we defined it there. Right? And so right now in our authorization context, we have our environment builder. So what we can do is in our context environment, not in our context environment. So we can go to the builder and we can create so let's see the builder itself, the environment builder, the service, and has a method build environment method. Alright, so we could call it, since we return authorization context environment, we could call it so we could auto wire this into, okay, and this is authorization environment. So it's no, it's going to be environment builder, right? And what this will do is basically call environment builder dot build. Hold on. It takes me the HTTP server. Takes me request. Right, so what I can do, again, I can replicate the same thing. Yeah. Like I said, this is supposed to be built. This is supposed to be built right below in the interceptor. So this is an auth interceptor. So authenticator, not authorized. And what I can do is have like environment interceptor where you build the environment, right? And have it intercept the request. Okay, if you go to the yeah, then we have to save it in a context. Yeah, this messy, it's messy as hell. And so I'm not supposed to have this here. Alright, so now if you go to our security, there is context, right? We have the auth context, right? And it's basically static, okay? And you have like the thread lookup to make sure that every thread has this variable. and this save our odd result. Okay, we don't want to make so much changes to this. What we want to do, just to is add another like a context, authorization context. Okay. No, environment. Now, like I was explaining before, normally this your auth context is supposed to include a host of things, right? And so that when you're performing all of the filter in the filter level, the environment is already set so that you could simply just get from the auth context and then you set the environment with the environment context. But in this case, so we are going to replicate the same thing here. We're going to have a final, which is going to be our environment, authorization environment context, which is going to be private. Final. It's going to be environment context. It's going to be equals to things like a thread local. Yeah. So it's going to be thread local of that. So it's a static method, so very static. Final thread local to make sure that every verb. So it's going to be like a new thread local. And we're going to have static methods, public static. So get environment. So we just have like an environment. So auth and go. So get environment is going to return get, right, and then to set environment. Just get it set. And even the authorization interceptor, which we've included, right, if we have just before we even run all of this, or even after I've run all of this, so throw nodes, return true. So we'll set the auth context, right? We also want to set auth environment. And this is in the interceptor level. And it is where we want to go in our builder. And essentially, you have the list of authenticators, which you have authenticators here, which is private final, right? Because so we also have another private final authorization builder. think it's going to be, and we're going to have this, we're going to have that. There's no error. Yes, it's going to create that. And what this is going to do is basically we are going to set the environment here. So after it initializes this variable, so we need to set the variable here. So it's environment builder dot put, right. And actually I could just call this environment builder here. Okay. Yeah, so we have an environment builder there. What I could do is call an environment builder. Environment context environment, authorization context environment. And I could also have like an environment builder, which is like private environment builder. There we go. And again, just for have like a comma there. Environment builder. What's happening? No. And what we have here is environment builder. Okay. And actually, I'm not going to have two of these arguments. I'm going to have one of them because this other one just takes in the environment. So what is going to happen? We're going to have the context, where is it? Environment context here. Now we are going to, so since the static method is going to, we're going to just set the environment context there. So we have the environment builder, and what we are going to do is just call environment builder dot build with the request, right, which is a servlet request. And now the builder returns an authorization context, which we now need to set. Okay, so what we can set is we can call environment context dot set environment. So all of that. Okay. And so what this does is that during the after authenticating, right, auth interceptor, right, after this it's going to handle all of the after handling the interceptor, it's going to build the request. Okay, but this actually I think should be in the filter section, not in the auth filter. Yeah, it should be in the filter because it's still doing the same thing. This authenticator, yeah, it should be in the filter. So I'm going to just move this from the authenticator because at the filter level we still know all of these things. These are sent with the message, so we want to keep it as low as we can. Okay, so we're just going to clean this up, and we're not actually using interceptors much. Require axe constructor, so we don't need. So we're already having the axe constructor, which is there. So what we are going to do is just copy the last build method. Okay, and so the interceptor is no longer needed. Where is it? Alt filter. Oh, there we go. So after we set context here, right? We also want to set environment, right? Then after which we want to clear the environment. Clear. So we do clear. So we have public. And dot clear environment. We have that. Okay. So that way we can call the builder direct. We can call it directly from. So now we have the builder class that builds. Let me see what's happening here. All right, so we have the. So we can get this now from environment, right? So have environment context dot get environment. Again, this is a monolith. Okay, so you are definitely getting that. But you could have a load function that loads the environment, basically the same thing, so that when you will move and you divide this into microservices, you're not worried about a function, you just go to the loads function, and then maybe you're changing a request to maybe get an environment or something. Either way, like I said, you're not wasting time. But each service itself should be able to build the environment. So yeah, it's the same thing. So in the filter section, what is the filter section? The interceptor, you can intercept the request and then build your environment for every service, right? Anyway, well, let me see. Let me ask GPT. Say I have microservice. Service has created context services get these contexts. They build this request. Right, so this is no, this is not what I'm asking for. In case you wondering how I learn, this is how I do it. I basically just ask GPT as clean as I can. So I hope you're reading it. So basically each environment builds, each microservice will build at one time. Yeah, different context, right? Yeah, once per request, context are set in just like we did. They load DB rules, which is what we are supposed to do. Yeah, example evaluation. Yeah, that's so. Again, it's the same thing. So you build the context itself. Let me just ask something also. If auth service handles auth. How if a service needs auth context, how do they get it? There we go. Right, so each context is rebuilt, right? That's what I was talking about. You rebuild the context. So this like this monolith, we can definitely use it. So again, you just put just the right amount of information in your auth context, just your authentication context, just to provide authentication. But you really trust what your auth service gives you. That's what GPT was explaining. But what I wanted to find out was if, of course, each service will build their own context, right? So which is it? I think the answer says is yes, which is standard, and it's what I was thinking about, right? So because it doesn't make sense to add like a request, and building the context is not exactly hard. You're literally just it's faster, way faster than making a request to the auth service to just basically get the context, and it's not really safe, which you already have, right? To get processing, which you can already do. So basically, you intercept the request, right? Use maybe interceptors, and then you build the context from there, just like we did in the interceptor just before moving to the filter level for the authentication service. And then you also build the environment also, and you do just like what we've done here. We've gotten the environment, and now we have the authorization context builder. Okay, and now we the authorization context builder. What does it do? So private authorization context. Final. We don't want to, like I said, we want to change this, right? Because the authorization context itself has resource, and that resource takes class, right? And that class can change based on different things. Let me see. But every action, if you think about it, okay, every action. Let me see. It depends. Really depends, because if you look at AWS, right, sometimes you might need a read for a single request. You might need multiple permissions across different resources. You can need a read request for S3 to be able to perform something on another service, right? Just so that it reads it from S3, then loads it onto the service, then maybe contact Dynamo to do something else. You can need all of these requests, and so you really don't want to minimize, and that's mostly in this case, in our case, something like that. What will mostly change will be the resource, right? But the permissions itself. But again, the how you call it, the subject, which is you, is not going to change. Okay, in this case, again, but the subject in a case like AWS can be a service itself. Okay, the subject making, so while you are the one sending a request to a service, and this service is sending another request to another service, in that case the subject is the service but not you. You get that? So it gets a bit complicated there, but in our case the subject is just you, so it will not change, right? And then you have the environments basically getting basic information that they are used to check against. This will again not change, so you could keep it like that. And now we have authorization context builder. We have environment which we have built, and we have business rules which we've also constructed. We have authorization context, which takes that authorization aspect. So now what we have is we pass a set of policies, we've gotten the policies. I want to build the authorization context, right? And this authorization context builder.build, which is going to take the class. So we can take authorization context builder. So private final authorization. So I think I spelled final wrong. Authorization context builder, which is just keep it like that. And what we can do is like do authorization context go to authorization context builder.build, and it takes in the resource request policies dot target. Okay, takes the class. Okay, and that's in this case. Yeah, so it takes in the target for that particular resource, and so based on the method, right, if you use this in different method, it's going to put in the target there. And so we now have the two main components to be able to build using our business rule engine. Okay, and right now I'm going to try to run the application just to make sure that things run, and I'm sure that something is going to break, but that's okay. Yes, authenticators, new filter, auth filter, yes. So we have bin, which is auth filter, new authentication, authenticators. So we have list of authenticators. So we're also taking the builder. So go to private final environment builder. So something like that. And this is going to take environment builder. I think that should solve that problem. Again, it's going to break somewhere else. Let's see. It doesn't. Oh, let's see what happens. Yes. Okay. So created the table, which is the business rule, as you can see, and everything is set. So that runs well. Okay. So in our next session, we are going to implement this third phase, which is going to use factory and the strategy pattern, if I'm not mistaken. But we're going to see how that works. But at least you've seen how we're building, and like I said, what we're going to be using when we're building the resource is we're going to create the object from the class that we've passed. Okay, and that's going to allow us. Oh, let me see. I think I'm actually making a mistake here. I'm thinking of the class because the resource is a class, but it's an object of a class. You understand? Yeah. Though the resource is a class, it's an object of a class, which is interesting now because when you are deleting, for example, when you're adding something or you're updating something, you're not updating the entire class, you're updating an object of that an instance of that class. And yeah, so that's interesting. Anyway, we'll see that in the next video. And I think that's right, because like I said, we just have users here. If we want to delete a user, right, what we'll need is an object of that user, the user ID. And so we have to get the argument of that. So in the user itself, okay, so the object, rather, the resource is going to be the object of with the class, right? So actually in the that should be interesting. That should be interesting. Yeah. So yeah, I see. So again, this is just part of the thinking process. It gets a little bit complicated. As you can see, I have found a bug. So like to do, create like a to do here. So we have like a join point here. So based on the target, which we definitely have, we want to get the object itself. So we'll need to load it through the repository. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we'll come back and do that update. So for now, things are on a stable point. All right then, see you in the next class, in the next session, and have a great day.